I think we're live.
Fantastic. Just waiting for attendees to start trickling in here. Give a few seconds here to let the room fill up. And good morning, afternoon, whatever time zone you are all in. It is currently 82 degrees in sunny Southern California, which makes us continue to be the best state in the entire country. For everyone else out there, your state is less superior than ours. We are still the greatest state in the country, no matter how many of us are currently moving to Texas for tax purposes. So we will take the weather win all day long. All right, go ahead and begin here. We just from a housekeeping purposes, for those of you who haven't been on a Zoom recently, there is a little question box at the bottom of your Zoom screen and a little Q&A. Feel free to pop in questions at any time. Best way to communicate with us. We will happily answer questions in real time as we're going through it. Pretty significant updates, pretty exciting stuff going on, and pretty significant impact. So you can also, there's a raise your hand feature, and if you want to ask a question, and we can turn your mic off mute, and that way you can ask a question real time. So feel free to raise your hand or to hit the Q&A button, and we will happily answer it. All right, so kind of a quick agenda item here. We have a new election cycle, so we actually have a bunch of new members, as you guys will see today, as you probably already noticed already. And then we'll also kind of give you an update of what we are currently monitoring, what the goals of the GRC are for going into this year, as well as our day on the Hill, which should be the most substantive one we've had so far. So give you a little bit of info on all these items. So the kind of one big thing that we want to identify is, and it's really interesting, I'll give you kind of a backstory. I was talking to a lobbyist in California, and we were just kind of going back and forth as a mortgage lobbyist, and I kind of asked him, I said, hey, like, how do you find what's happening out there? Like, what are you doing to get a feeler? I mean, we probably have 3,000 proposed bills in California's legislative cycle each year. So what are you doing to figure this out? And he's like, every day I wake up and I read every single stupid bill they're proposing, and I try to find my way through this. And he's like, and I capture the attention. He goes, and sometimes people tell me, sometimes we get sources. What I can tell you is that we have lots of things that we try to do here to try to catch this stuff. So we have tagged, I kid you not, thousands of statutes across the country, so that anytime a legislative body tries to modify that statute, we get email dingers on it. We've got a ton of research resources that we use here to try to figure it out. But sometimes the way that the legislative bodies try to amend a pre-existing piece of legislation is by not amending anything and just introducing entirely new legislation, and we'll never catch that kind of stuff. But for people within this organization tagging it for us and saying, hey, I heard about this, or I'm part of another association, like, for example, we had we'll talk about this later, about a Colorado mortgage association brought to our attention a bill that's happening out in Colorado. So really do want to tell you guys is if you've got a lead of any kind, we're happy to take it, happy to run with it. But oftentimes the best resource is the boots on the ground, being our people out there, all of the membership that really can provide us a great value in terms of legislation that's kind of becoming about. And then the last thing too is we're here to serve you guys. So at the end of the day, is if there are items that we're not addressing or really focused on in terms of advocacy, please let us know. And by all means, we're here and we think we're serving the association best, but at the end of the day, is we want to make sure that we're not thinking in a vacuum. So a little bit about this amazingly handsome and diverse crowd here. We've got a new membership base, some familiar faces, some new ones. A big thank you to all of those that serve on the Government Relations Committee. It is an elected body. and there's an application process. Kat can obviously provide people more information if you have any interest on serving on this committee or other committees. She can give you the information behind that. A lot of us are holdovers from the last one, but we also have some really fun new members. We've got Chris Ambrose, who is my favorite Oregonian / Washington attorney, and is fantastic. And it's nice to up the attorneys on this group. Brian is also joining us and is new, and very, very excited to have him on board. And then we also have Ruben, who many of you guys know over at Wheeland, who is also in his first little foray with us, has been absolutely instrumental in the state of New York. And we'll talk about that in a little bit, where he's flexed a little bit of his own muscles to try to make sure we can have a direct impact on things that will have an impact on you. So thank you to all the new Government Relations Committee. Thank you for all those who are who agreed to stick along for round 2. So let's talk a little bit about the things that we are actively monitoring and trying to make an impact in. So one of them is a holdover from last year. You guys probably saw a million emails from us. They have petitions. We talked about the conference. It was the New York transfer tax issue. It's still not dead, right? So effectively, as we will continue to monitor this thing, and it doesn't appear that it will come back out, or there's really any movement on it, but nonetheless, we will obviously monitor this and try to make sure that the transfer tax does not become an issue. And I'll talk a little bit more about what that is for those that are unfamiliar with it. What is a new issue in New York is an attempt at requiring licensing for small balance loans, and we'll talk in detail about that. Colorado is an issue we are actively mitigating and have been in conversations with the legislative body out there, and have good news to report on the efforts out there. And the last one is really more so monitoring than impacting, which is just the CDC Eviction Moratorium. Really just news to report that many of you probably already know, but that the nationwide eviction moratorium was extended through June 30th. And that happened, I think, 1 or 2 days ago. So that is, we'll talk about that a little bit more. So New York transfer tax, we'll briefly talk about that. The first thing here is, I actually saw a little Q&A. I want to make sure. I will jump on that question in a little bit. So the New York transfer tax, for those of you that are unfamiliar with it, was basically a tax that was imposed for properties that were sold within 1 or 2 years of acquisition. And so obviously a lot of you out there make short-term bridge loans, and this would have basically stalled out or completely stopped bridge lending out there, because obviously none of this pencils out at 15 to 20% on the gross sales price as a tax on the property. Again, this bill appears to be inactive. We will continue to monitor it and notify you to the degree we need to become more active on this one. Next one here is much more relevant and currently active, and have a lot to thank for Ruben. We'll go into that. So it's New York licensing. It's Bill AB 1420. As many of you know, there's always there's 2 chambers. One is usually an assembly, the other is a Senate, and so they run parallel bills. That's why you oftentimes see an A, B, and an S, which means in the Senate it's Senate Bill 1061, and in the Assembly it's Assembly Bill 1420. So what is this bill? High level, and why you should care about it, is that it requires a license for any person making a business purpose loan, as long as that loan is less than $500,000. The crazy thing about this particular bill is from a penalties perspective, is if you make one of these loans and you are not licensed, it would void the loan, i.e. like no principal return, like nothing. I mean, it's the craziest penalty for one of these situations. When you read through the bill and try to understand the why, it appears as though they are trying to target factoring lenders. That's really the impetus behind this bill, is that New York, and if you guys recall, in December we put out an email about this as well, which was that there's been a lot of movement based on factoring activity, and lots of states do not like factoring in general, because they're, as you guys know, for anyone that's ever been involved, they're generally very high interest rate loans. They have a fairly high default rate, and so as a general rule, that they're loans that legislators love to look at. However, what happened in the December update was that they created a disclosure regime related to these types of loans. But there was a real estate exemption that sat in the disclosure regime. So when that bill passed, we announced and said, hey, if you're making unsecured loans or you're making loans that are not real estate secure, just know that there's a disclosure-based regime. So basically, you've got to provide like a Truth in Lending Act disclosure for these types of loans. Probably doesn't affect most of you. This one doesn't have the exemption in it, which is weird. We think it's likely an oversight. We don't, when we've talked about it with the legislative body out there, they don't really seem too familiar with kind of the why on this one. There isn't so far there hasn't been a direct yes, we're trying to regulate small real estate mortgage lenders is not what we're hearing right now. It appears currently as an oversight rather than anything malicious or intentional. But nonetheless, the current bill doesn't say anything about real estate secured loans. It doesn't exempt real estate secured loans. So if you made a loan less than $500,000 and this bill passed, it would affect you. So for that reason, it's why AAPL sent out the petition. You guys seen it in the emails. You're seeing it on social media. This is an active issue in which your participation matters. No matter what we do on our side, we can be the best educators. We can try to wield as much influence as possible. And we can be the best advocates. Ultimately, they don't care unless a lot of you care. And by you care, you contact them. That's what actually makes these things change and move, no matter what anyone else tells you. I mean, truly boots on the ground advocacy works and nothing else other than, giant contributions or something, but that's not, we're not Wells Fargo, folks. So, but let me tell you a little bit about what we are doing, and this will probably be helpful for you. So particularly a huge shout out to Ruben, who sits on this committee. One of the assemblymen who sits on the Banking and Finance Committee in the state of New York is someone who Ruben knows well, and he's actually been having direct communications with. So the GRC prepared a substantive legal memorandum basically identifying why we think this bill isn't correctly written as is, right? Our approach on this particular issue is, hey, I think the people you're trying to regulate are these people, and you're accidentally regulating these people by this bill, right? Being us as mortgage lenders. We don't think that that's your intent. Here's an exemption we're proposing to insert into this language if you want to pass this bill, right? That's the legal memorandum that we prepared. We've submitted that over to a friendly legislator, Assemblyman Mickelden over there, and having a direct dialogue with him. So far, very receptive. We'll report on that as we know more. But currently, it looks like we're having really good substantive conversations that are moving the needle there, which is great. Colorado loan servicing. So big shout out to Boomerang Capital, which is an AAPL member. They're the ones that gave us the lead on this one here. And so effectively, and this is one of those that's really scary because we've got trackers on servicing licensing on a nationwide basis, but it never popped up on any of the trackers because it's the proposal is done through a regulatory action versus your traditional statutory actions. And so it's a little nuanced in terms of the way they are attempting to pass this bill. But we got the lead, and effectively what happened here and why it's important to you is that any party who is servicing loans in Colorado would be required to have a license. And what's kind of weird and crazy about this as proposed was that even if you were self-servicing, if you're servicing your own loans in the state of Colorado, you would have to be licensed to do that activity. So you'd have to give it to a third-party licensed servicer, even if it's your own loan. And I know for a lot of you who like to self-service and have built your own servicing regime, you don't want to give up that level of control. And so that could have been a really big issue out there. The great news on this particular bill is that we've been reaching out to Assemblyman Weissman out there, and he's been extremely receptive. So he's the bill sponsor. We've been talking to him, and he said, look, I understand the self-servicing issue is an issue. He's withdrawn the current bill as it stands and said, look, I am intending on reintroducing this bill, but we'll be in communications with you. We've submitted a 50-state memorandum over to him to demonstrate that Colorado would be very much in an anomaly if they passed any form of licensing on business purpose loans. He seems currently willing to modify the bill to provide, for example, an exemption on bridge loans altogether. So I think we're getting really good traction and really good momentum, and it's a very pragmatic approach. So it, oftentimes we find ourselves in a position where if we can educate the other party involved and they're willing to listen, they understand that we're coming from a place of not trying to just kill every bill and attack every bill, but really to say, look, like, I think you're trying to regulate these people and you're accidentally regulating us, and you don't even know we exist, but here we are, and we're friendly, and we're your friendly neighborhood private lender, right? So and we get generally good response to this. So we'll report more on that to the degree that it becomes relevant. CDC, we've talked about it a little bit, but as you know, there's a national eviction moratorium in place. And it's got the most cockamamie legal interpretation that sits behind it. It makes no sense. It's being constitutionally fought all over the country, and in our opinion, probably should lose on constitutional grounds, as it's completely unrelated to what is probably the CDC's authority on an issue like this. But nonetheless, that issue will resolve itself in certain jurisdictions. You guys have probably heard there are district courts in Texas and in Florida who have effectively overturned this, but it's not. On a nationwide basis, it's still the law of the land in most of the country. And effective, the one thing that you should know is even though there is technically a national eviction moratorium, it is not. It doesn't mean you cannot evict someone. It just means that they have protections. If you try to evict them, they can produce an affidavit saying, "I qualify for these reasons," and in that situation, you would not be able to proceed with the eviction. We produced a good memorandum at AAPL to basically identify the process. So if you want to search AAPL's website on the eviction moratorium, and you'll find all the substantive material if you're trying to navigate an eviction post foreclosure for our membership based out there. Oh, and then notably is that, I think, as I said, I think it was yesterday or the day before, the CDC just extended. It was currently slated to end on March 31st. Everyone kind of expected it, as did we. There was an extension through June 30th. In all likelihood, there will probably be a further extension past June 30th, knowing that the current administration and the powers that be right now on the federal level, there appears to be a significant impetus to continue these sorts of forbearances and moratoriums and these sorts of things is probably where we're headed for some time. So then what are we trying to do outside of the pressing issues? As a general rule, we see our role as education. We find that when we have receptive audiences, and oftentimes we do, that if we can just explain to them the unintended consequences of their actions, they are generally receptive to modifications, if not outright withdrawals, because they're attempting to solve a problem that is not us, and the problem that they are solving can be solved in other ways. And so education tends to be the leading way to combat this. Trying to make sure that we are connecting with you. Like I said, I mean, both of the bills we discussed, both New York and Colorado, but for the membership base of Ruben and his team over at Wheeland and the team over at Boomerang and the impacts they've been able to have, probably wouldn't have gone very far. So your engagement is crucial in these sorts of things that are happening. If not, for tips and also for actual legislative introductions. And then also too, as you guys know, as AAPL is producing a lending survey, and this is extremely important for GRC purposes, because at the end of the day is the legislature needs to understand why they care, right? So you can say is we're an association of 500 plus private lenders, and that generally doesn't matter to them, right? Because they want to know the size, scope, and of well, what sort of activity are you actually conducting out there? When you actually, it's the best hidden secret is private lending is an extremely large part of the market now that no one really realizes. And so when they actually understand the impact and the size implications of how big this market is, that tends to actually bring a bigger narrative. So rather than us just, giving out the facts that we know to be true, where we know it's billions of dollars in annual activity, we know that there's 500 members, we want to provide more factual data in terms of, hey, it's a body that is actually this dollar amount, it's producing this amount of loans in these states, to really be able to demonstrate why they should care about our presence rather than just our word for it, if that makes sense. Day on the Hill, for those of you that are unfamiliar with this, is each year Kat is our secret ninja warrior and is able to get meetings with people in ways that no one understands. But she's fantastic. So if you ever need to meet with the legislature, you just send Kat in and she does things in the background and suddenly that person's willing to meet with you. So Day on the Hill is one of those shining examples where we are actively able to meet with various influential senators and assemblymen, and more importantly, their staff who actually writes the legislation. And so we actually get to sit down with them and say, hey, you know, here's who we are. And traditionally, it's been really more so informational. Hey, we're a private lending association. Here's what private lenders are. Because in their minds, as you guys probably have seen for yourself, is that your average person in Congress does not understand what a private lender is or how that private lender is any different than the banks that they're regulating. And so it's more so of, we have no idea you exist. And so first, it's just kind of a, hey, we exist and we are not a bank. And the things that they are doing right now at the federal level is that they are creating random rules that have unintended consequences. So you guys saw this a few years ago with HMDA, for example, where all of a sudden, all business purpose lenders are submitting crazy HMDA reports, which make no sense for business purpose lenders. Because like one of the questions is like, what's the race of your borrower? I'm like, I don't know, he's an LLC. You're like, I don't know what race this LLC is, but I'm having a very hard time telling you this, right? So, but these are the unintended consequences that you deal with when you have a regulator, when you have legislators who don't know what we do impacting what we do. So this year, instead of just going from an informational who we are perspective, we're really trying to get some advocacy out there on the national level. So that there's two things that we're really pushing on. One is we think that there is an opportunity that others are not seeing out there, and that's particularly is, can we get the SAFE Act, and for those of you that are unfamiliar with the SAFE Act requires a mortgage loan originator license to originate consumer purpose mortgage loans nationally. So it requires a license if you're going to make a consumer loan, doesn't matter what state you're in. And it created a whole regime behind it and licensing and registration, the whole thing. But what's interesting is there are exemptions to the SAFE Act, meaning you cannot require a license to do certain activities. So for example, timeshares, exempted, right? So there were people who sat in the rooms when the SAFE Act was written that have really cute exemptions for them. And so our goal in this is that if we can actually get an exemption dropped in to the SAFE Act, we could really almost nullify current licensing requirements in the 10 states that do. And so our goal here is seeing if we can actually get a federal preemption to licensing. And we've got proposed statutory language that we're going to come in with. So we'll see how that goes. We'll see what the audience is, but really could do some pretty interesting advocacy efforts and really change the landscape of private lending for the better and forever. So you're not worried about us updating you every month of like, oh, crud, this state's trying to require a license tomorrow, right? National preemption would be a great opportunity for us. The next one is actually eliminating those HMDA reports. They make no sense for business purpose loans, never have, never will. The questions they are asking are really only relevant to consumer loan transactions. We were clearly an oversight in round one. We're hoping that we can get something that looks akin to what the credit unions were able to get related to HMDA reporting. And then some of the what I call the dream list type stuff is, this is really all mortgage lenders, which is, if for anyone that's been involved with a borrower who's filed bankruptcy, that it's the ultimate gamesmanship, and it's really a system that is designed to stall out the process, for lack of a better word. So generally speaking, the bankruptcy process is manipulated and used, and by all means, there should be a bankruptcy process, but more often than not, it is solely used as a stall tactic and is used to just slow down the natural course of what's going to happen anyways. So really just discussions, at least at the entry level, of potential revisions to the bankruptcy code that would really be, I think, smart solutions that don't really tread on people's rights in that way. So at this point, we'll kind of open it up to questions, comments on what we're doing, where we should head to. I saw 2 questions in the chat box, and one was, do we have lenders that are funding loans in Canada, particularly in and around the Toronto area? And the answer is yes. The AAPL, even though it's the American Association of Private Lenders, does have many Canadian counterparts. And so probably best resource is to figure out who are the Canadian-based lenders, is probably reach out to Kat or Linda over there. I'm also happy to give you a few resources as well, as we know some Canadian lenders. I'm not sure for myself, at least Toronto, but there may even be people on this call that make loans out there. So yes, we are technically the American Association of Private Lenders, but some of our members do in fact make loans in the state of Canada, or in the state of Canada, in the country of Canada. Let's see. All right, let's see. I don't see anyone else here with I don't see any other questions in the Q&A box. I'll leave it open for a second here. All right. Seeing none, I want to appreciate everyone that's on the call today. Thank you to our new members and our current members that sit on the GRC. And also thank you to all the attendees today. We really value your contribution and your time. Let us know what we can do to serve you better here. And the next town hall we will have will be next quarter at the end of June. So looking forward to speaking with everyone, seeing everyone. Hope all of you have a wonderful rest of the day.